So our social justice theme this month is climate change. And I will admit to having been a little hesitant in the 5.5 years of my career as a professional clergy person to talk much about climate change because I don't know what to do. Because that problem is so big that I get overwhelmed when I think about what I can say that is true and authentic and genuine and means something. I spent my whole life worried about climate and the environment around me. I was talking with our Earth Ethics Action team the other day and mentioned that my actual first bit of organizing or social justice activism in my life was that I formed an environmentalist organization called the Cat Love Whale Club when I was in second grade. What we did was we researched different animals and their habitats so we could learn what we could do to help improve their lives. There was a lot of cutting of soda rings. Any millennials? I'm looking at you. Please tell me that you remember this. Okay. It was a big deal in the early 90s, late 90s to cut your soda can rings so that fish and wildlife didn't get stuck in them. I was very involved in that. In fact, I was an early opposer of SeaWorld because I loved whales. And I loved orcas more than I loved any other kind of animal. I understand that that's not technically a whale. It's fine. And the Cat Love Whale Club went to SeaWorld. There used to be a SeaWorld in Aurora, Ohio, 5 minutes from my house when I was growing up, a SeaWorld, which was closed for half of the year. So it's bad enough, right, to have this whale in a little tiny tank, and then in a place that is closed. You've brought a whale to Ohio. Anyway, we went, and I had been many times before, and I'd never thought about it before, but we'd been studying animals, and we went, and I saw the poor orca's little bent-over fin, and I went, oh no, I hate this now. And still, I struggle to talk about climate change, about the environment, and so this month's theme is a challenge for me. I was thinking and thinking and thinking, and I realized that there is something easy, well, relatively easy, something I am passionate about that is relatively easy to communicate, and that something is lawns, and that I hate them. As it turns out, if I'm telling the truth, I have never been a fan of the monoculture lawn. My father is a big monoculture lawn guy. Any of you who know anything about him will be unsurprised by that. My father likes conformity. He likes things that are normal and in straight lines. It's been a time. Actually, I was not allowed to mow the front lawn at my parents' house. I've never been allowed to mow the front lawn at my parents' house because I cannot drive a mower in a straight line. And my father refuses to have anything but perfectly straight lines in his front yard. And the lawn was always a topic of conversation. You cannot spend that kind of time on something without it becoming a big topic of conversation. And the conversation usually went like this. Our lawn is perfect. The neighbor does okay. The neighbor next to that does terrible because they do not mow their lawn more than once a month. The people up the street are irritating because they let the dandelions grow in their lawn. And that means the dandelions blow down the street and dandelions wind up in my lawn. As it happens, the people up the street with the dandelions were my grandparents. And my grandfather Well, for a number of reasons, none of which that I love dandelions, was very intentionally not getting rid of his dandelions. He also my grandparents had 15 acres at the time, and so that was a lot of potential dandelions and a lot of other random weeds that nobody bothered to mow because why? I'm not gonna go back there. And the only times we ever did go back there was to pick little baby strawberries out of the grass near the tall grasses, or to run through the big grasses to get into the woods where the blackberries were. That is, if we weren't sustaining ourselves on the currant bush in the closer lawn instead. So I grew up sort of split between these worlds, all of a tenth of a mile apart. My parents' lawn, which felt really good to be barefoot in, and I never once got an injury from walking on. And my grandparents' yard, which was full of stuff, which when my cousin Jason decided he wanted to mow the lawn by mowing in star patterns, nobody cared. The lawn got mowed, that's all Grandpa cared about. Where we could forage for food when Grandma kicked 12 of us out of the house in the middle of the day. If you have a million cousins, it's good to have a big yard to run around with your million cousins in. Anyway, I have never liked a monoculture lawn. And when I was a little kid, across the street from our house was a farm. It wasn't a working farm anymore, but the kind of grown over that a former farm becomes, and I was so angry when they sold it to turn it into quarter-acre lot development housing. I was so angry that we went to a city council meeting, my parents and I, and they would not let me, all of 6 at the time, stand up and speak, so my father spoke for me, a complicated man, and he said, "My daughter said we didn't move to the country to live in the suburbs." And that is true. We did not move to the country to live in the suburbs, but then the suburbs arrived across the street. Identical houses with perfect monoculture lawns. Little tiny, so small that my father couldn't even respect them. Doesn't take any work to keep up that much yard. Okay. And since then, I haven't lived anywhere that I have a yard. I moved out of my parents' house when I was just 17 to go to college, and then I lived in a dorm and another dorm and another dorm and an apartment 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 and an apartment. And in the rental unit where Caitlin and I currently live, we have about this much grass, and we don't cut it because there's this much of it. Why? But we're buying a house. And the house has a yard. And the yard has been very much on my mind lately. When we viewed the house, one of the neighbors was outside and he said, he was so excited that we might be his neighbors. And then he said, "We keep our yards nice." And I said, "Oh no." And he said, "I mow this front bit of grass." And I said, "Cool, you can do that. I'll handle the back," which is where all of the actual yard is. And I started making plans to do literally any other thing but have grass that I have to mow. One, because I spent enough of my childhood on a lawnmower or pushing a lawnmower, and I'm done. That's over for me. 2, I don't want to buy a lawnmower. 3, I don't want to be near a lawnmower. 4, grass is terrible. And I don't just mean like my aesthetics don't like grass, but my aesthetics do not like grass, that is correct. But grass is, as it happens, not beneficial to the environment almost at all. It takes a lot of water. It takes a lot of chemicals to keep it a monoculture. Monocultures are bad. It is bad when things are all the same, whether those things are blades of grass or people. And theoretically, we learned as a country what happens when you plant the same thing over and over and over and over again in the same soil, and then you get a dust bowl. No, did we learn that lesson? I have questions for us. Notes for the rest of this. So, lawns, as Americans use them, just different from other places in the world, but the American lawn is in many ways a locus of control and conformity. It is really no surprise that my father, who I'm using as object lesson for man who came of age in the 50s and 60s, really loves conformity, who found a way he could fit in and do things correctly, who is worried all the time about whether or not things are correct. Because lawns let you look at somebody else's life and decide if they're doing it correctly, right? My father's judgment about other people's lawns is part of a process of social control and judgment that says you should have money and time, one or the other, to maintain a meticulous lawn. Grass does not want to be the sort of blanket that we often see it as. Weeds happen. Plants happen. Dandelions happen. Think everything. Let's talk a little bit about the history of the American lawn. When white people got here, the grasses of this country were not made for grazing cattle. They were not good for your livestock. But the livestock didn't much care, and so they ate all of it anyway. And then it didn't grow back because it wasn't meant to be grazed on. So the colonizers said, all right, Europe, send us some more grass. And they got different kinds of grass, including the Kentucky bluegrass that is now the lawn standard, at least on the East Coast. For the most part, American homes followed European trends. You see that here more than where I grew up in Ohio or where I most recently lived in Los Angeles. Houses that are pretty close to the street have maybe a little front garden and then more of a yard in the back, a garden area. That was a European practice of privacy in the context of a home. In the 18th century, a carpet of green was installed at Versailles, and suddenly rich people had ideas. That became a standard of lawn design in France and in England, which was really into copying French for the aesthetic at the time. And then George Washington and Thomas Jefferson imported European landscapers to make Monticello and Mount Vernon into beautifully landscaped open areas. This gave America's rich people something to aspire to, and that something was green carpet in front of your house. The early suburbs on the East Coast, if you listen to their names, you'll hear a lot of the word park. They were literally trying to look like parks, right? There had been a movement for public parks, public spaces, and then these private communities wanted to look like they were these beautiful natural places you could run around in, which of course meant that everybody's lawn was exactly the same. And then when we started traveling more by train and by car, we redesigned how our homes relate to the street. It stopped being about privacy and about keeping horse smell from you, and started being active pressure to beautify the front of your house so that travelers would have something nice to look at as they went by. Then after World War II, government-backed mortgages encouraged builders to make more blue-collar tract housing. And they included big lawns wherever they could, because that made it look more like rich people's housing. Wild. In the United States today, there are an estimated 163,800 square kilometers of lawn space. That's basically all of New England above New York, like Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts, the whole bit, just grass. Just grass that nothing can eat. Just grass that takes a lot of water. That isn't just lawns, that includes parks and the only thing I hate more than lawns, golf courses. I have a shirt, which I considered wearing today, but I don't really wear t-shirts on Sunday. It says, "No turfs and no turf. No trans-exclusionary radical feminists. No turf, like no carpets of grass. Against transphobia and golf courses." The way that we use grass in this country right now is wildly unsustainable, and the risks range from a depletion of water aquifers to the devastation of local ecosystems. A perfect lawn can also contribute to rising carbon dioxide emissions. So what other options do you have? What am I gonna do with this piece of land? It's this big, not even a quarter of an acre. My father does not think I have any land, because I don't, and I don't want to. What else can you do? Well, some things are really easy. If you simply mow the lawn you have less and don't use pesticides on it, that's gonna cause a lot of improvement, right? A lawn that is unmowed is space for bees and pollinators to live and hide. Not using pesticides feels like a pretty obvious. Please don't use pesticides. Don't. Things that end in "side," maybe not. What if we didn't do that? Genocide, pesticide, none of that. Don't take the leaves out of your yard in the fall. When they fall down, let them fall down and be leaves. This has a couple of benefits. It gives the bees a place to hide. The bees need a lot of places to hide. We have been forcing the bees out in public more often than they would like to be. Please respect the bees' privacy at this and all times. But also, those leaves will turn into nutrients for the yard over the course of the winter. They will, in fact, biodegrade their leaves, friends. In the fall, when I see people putting all the leaves into big plastic bags, I think, what are we doing here? What is this? The answer to a natural process is to put it in plastic bags. If that is not the American relationship with the environment, I don't know if there's a clearer picture. You can do some other things that are even better. You can add keystone plants to your gardening. So when you're thinking about, what am I gonna plant in my yard? What am I gonna, okay, it's just me who's thinking about that? It's spring. Everybody who has planting in their life should be thinking about what they're gonna plant. Well, take a look. There are long lists on the internet. I will send you the list of keystone plants. You could also talk to any member of the Earth Ethics team. Sue Jacobson is right here. She knows lots of things. You could talk to Terry Smith, who helps tend to our keystone plant and pollinator garden out there, which is beautiful. I think Terry might even be downstairs today. Y'all know things about keystone plants, I'm saying. And there are two big kinds of keystone plants. There are host plants, which feed the caterpillars of approximately 90% of butterflies and moths. And then there are plants that feed specialist bees who only eat pollen from specific plants. I've been talking about bees a lot. You probably know that the bees are dying, that One of the planet's big problems is that we have fewer and fewer bees every year. Some of this is because in our love for yards and parks that all look the same, we have gotten rid of so many of the keystone plants around the country. So every keystone plant we can add to our yard here at WES, to our yards at home, to a garden that you have access to a garden that you are willing to put a hole in. I don't care whose it is. That keystone plant is going to offer food and sustenance and space to live for bees that need our help really desperately. And without bees, there's a lot less pollination, there's a lot less flowers in general. The world is more beautiful with bees. So let's take some care of the bees. You can also replace your monoculture grass with grass alternatives. This is a big project with a lot of research that needs to be done if you're going to do it. But it begins with killing the grass you have by maybe putting cardboard over it for a season or tilling it under. These grasses are pretty, they want to come back. We've bred them to be interested in returning. You want to make sure you get weeds out of your lawn, not because weeds are bad, but because many of the weeds that we have are actually not indigenous to the areas that we live. They are weeds we brought from Europe, because it turns out if you bring the cow, you bring whatever's in the cow's digestive system. And that could include weeds. There are a lot of grass alternatives that actually don't even need mowed. They stay low to the ground. They are pretty, they are different, they're still green. You still kind of fit in. So think about, in your particular context, what you might do. Maybe you don't have a yard. Maybe you don't have a yard because you chose to live somewhere where that's not something. That's cool. Applause for that. Maybe you have already done a bunch of changes to your yard. Claps for that. But where can you add something else? Can you help us find a way to move away from having a lawn here at WES? Do you have access to a garden that you could put some pollinators or keystone plants in? Do you have a friend in your neighborhood who is maybe a little over-attached to the green carpet? And you could have a conversation just about maybe mowing the lawn a little less. Because any step in that direction is a step that is going to help the bees and the butterflies and all of the other plants. It's going to help us breathe better. It's going to keep our water cleaner. Any step that we take is a good one. There are, of course, challenges to getting this done. Money being a big one, right? Lawn care is expensive in general. And when you're doing something outside of the standard, it can be a little more expensive, right? The top advice if you're gonna completely redo your lawn is to hire an expert. And if you can afford that, do it. And if you can't, there are lots of DIY guides on the internet. You have resources here, but also the government might offer you some subsidies. The DC city government has a bunch of different grants available. We're looking into one for a rainwater garden here at WES. In Montgomery County, they've done some of the other difficult work for you already, because the other difficulty is your neighbors and the potential of a housing association, right? The other difficulty is someone you're in a contract with who gets to say how you keep your yard. Well, in Montgomery County, they have already passed a law that says that not mowing your lawn or installing alternative grasses can't be reported as a nuisance. What if we work on legislation like that wherever we live? Because everybody should get to decide to have a greener lawn. I mean that conceptually, not literally. that everybody should be able to step outside of that conformity box that is the green carpet of a lawn and say, you know what, my values and my aesthetics, either or, both and, say that I want to do this. Because we're all going to benefit from, again, bees, butterflies, pollinators, air, water, right? Work together with your neighbors. Or if you live in a building where there is perhaps a rooftop and the rooftop has maybe a garden, or it doesn't yet, there could be a garden there. And that garden could have keystone plants, it could have pollinators. You could put a tree on a roof if you wanted to. Not for the full of the tree's life, they get roots, but you could do a lot of things. So I encourage you to think about where you're at, what your situation is, and what a step you can take is. Because the problem of climate change is big and huge and terrifying. And the only way to address it is to take the steps that we can take. I am clear that a golf course is a bigger problem than any of us could ever hope to be. I am clear that the very wealthy's lawns, which are meticulous and giant, are a bigger problem than most of your lawns likely are. And we can work on that stuff too, and we should. We should work on everything we can work on, but one thing that you can do, just you, is plant something in your yard. Plant something here, join a community garden, bother your HOA until they say, okay, fine. Everybody doesn't have to have perfect grass. Bother your city government until they say, okay, fine, it's not a nuisance. Each little step will help a lot. And the bees certainly will thank you for any work that you do. Hopefully, their thanks don't come with stingers, but more with honey that we have gotten from them ethically. But as we continue this month and into next month, when we will have some celebration for Earth Day, think about what little steps you can take. How, in the same way as we change ourselves and our community step by step, just sticking to it, we change the world that way as well. Things are urgent and scary, and we need quicker action from our government, from the world's governments, than we are currently seeing. But that doesn't mean it's time to give up. That actually means it's time to do it a little harder. So, as spring springs, think of the bees. Plant something. And if you want to plant something here at WES, whether that thing is a plant or an idea, you just let me know. I'd love to hear about it. Thank you.